well, I have two choices. I can say that life has gypped me again and fooled me again, and I better go find another stage one, type relationship. Or I make that big decision to say, wait a minute, that got me interested, that got me involved. Now it's time to actually decide I'm not going to be with all those other people. I am going to commit myself to this person. I'm going to do the work. And that leads to a much longer, much more difficult, but a real and meaningful and purposeful actual creation of love and a relationship and a family and all the other things that a person can build if they put in the work, take responsibility, and really set themselves to doing that.
My pleasure this evening to welcome Tod Jacobs and Dr. Peter Lynn. These guys, let me read through their credentials a little bit. Pretty ridiculous. Todd's got a Wall Street background, Columbia, Northwestern. They're on the CV. Made a stint at J.P. Morgan, and now is the director of the David Robinson Institute for Jewish Heritage in Jerusalem. Appreciate that these guys are joining us quite late in the night or the evening their time. And then Dr. Peter Lynn. MA in Applied Positive Psychology. I love the sounds of that. UPenn, right? Advanced studies in human and organizational psychology as well. And beyond the fact that we're all kind of geeks for this stuff here, I understand you also captained the U.S. World Duathlon team at one point. So
right, back in the day.
Back in the day. So we got some
back
athletes
in the
here too. Well, it's a real pleasure to talk to both of you guys. Thank you for joining me.
Sure.
Great. Thanks for having us.
So I think we're going to center the discussion quite a bit around your new book that I had a chance to check out over the weekend, Not a Partnership, Why We Keep Getting Marriage Wrong and How We Can Get It Right. So before we maybe dive in and figure out what we can cover here in a little bit of your time, and I appreciate in advance your sharing your wisdom on this, I just want to tell you about a couple, I think I referred off air to a couple recent guests I've had on and conversations that just somehow the universe has provided, and this all aligns us at a great time to kind of piggyback. So recently aired an interview with a European gentleman who started a business in Africa, a technology business, and suddenly found himself on the Interpol red flag list, up for extradition and 21 years in a Nigerian prison on a business partnership gone bad. And it seems like in business, we think so little, I should say, about exploring the quality of our partnerships, whereas marriage is one that we often like to think about a lot, but maybe we don't think about either in quite enough or the right way. And maybe a couple others. So there's a guy who was on quite a while ago named Greg Anmundson, and something that struck me about your book. So Greg he's got a military and law enforcement background and is a CrossFit athlete. He's also just finished up missionary. And what he's doing is going back out and combining spirituality and athletics through his CrossFit facility. And his specialty is really taking biblical wisdom. In particular, he loves the stories of biblical warriors and finding meaning in those and bringing them to modern life. So maybe to segue into your book, it really struck me that you guys take an ancient view on marriage and apply that wisdom to 21st century life. So can you tell us about that a little bit as an entrance point?
Sure. Maybe I'll jump in here. This is Tod. So what happened, just to give you the little bit of background that leads into this. So Peter and I met, I think about 15, 16 years ago, at about the time that I was trying to open up an institute in Jerusalem, which would deal with young people who, when I say young compared to me, but in their 20s, 30s, up to about 40 years old, college graduates, graduate students, young professionals who wanted to come to this institute to study a number of things which come out of kind of ancient Jewish wisdom and mysticism, which would primarily relate to things like ethics and leadership and character development, philosophy, things like that. And what we found was that one of the things that people were really interested in and incredibly poorly prepared for was relationships, love, and marriage. Which you can pluck out of the Ivy League somebody who is super talented, smart, go-getter, ready to go make his his or her first million or cure cancer or whatever it is, and ready for everything in life. And then you say to them, well, how are you prepared for what you yourself might actually say is the most important part of your life, which is going to be your marriage and relationship and the family that you build and your legacy. And people say, like, what do you mean? And then you just like literally have to like just kind of like pick at it a little bit. You realize people have no role models, no education, no review process, no formal educational process. And so with less preparation than we would like, try and help our kids with a painting with a finger painting project, we enter this relationship scratching our heads and saying, wow, this is a huge need amongst these people. And so we began delving into more and more, not just the sort of mystical and cultural and character and leadership and ethical stuff that we've been doing, but we started looking particularly for a lot of nuggets that are out there regarding what causes love, what a healthy relationship looks like, how giving fits in, how responsibility fits in, a huge wealth of information that we were able to marry up with a lot of very cutting edge kind of stuff that Peter was doing from his positive psychology research at University of Pennsylvania. And suddenly we felt we just hit this unbelievable combination of ancient, self-evidently profound wisdom with modern, ways of looking at things. And then even stripping it of any religious context to kind of build powerful, successful relationships. And that was, kind of how we got into it. So it's a kind of a circuitous way of answering your question, but that's more or less the way we started doing this.
Yeah, that's really interesting background. Peter, did you want to add to that?
I was just saying that one thing that we found is that although Tod and I a lot in looking at Jewish mysticism, this book that we wrote is really a book for everyone across the board. It's not directed towards any particular religious background. It's really a book that applies to everyone, and especially now fused with positive psychology, we really think that it can be someone that can impact your marriage no matter what stage you are at really in the marriage process, whether you are pre-marriage, just in the beginning of it or deep into it. These principles that we pull out of this ancient wisdom, again, fused with positive psychology, are really applicable across the board, not just to all different types of people, but to all different stages of a marriage.
Wow. Yeah. You guys, so you said several things in there. One that really, I think, resonates with the theme I have here. Oftentimes the guest and the recurring theme is really about finding ways to find meaning, purpose, and happiness in life. And I think ultimately that's one of the things you guys are after with the focus on marriage. And I mean, why reinvent the wheel, right? If there's this ancient wisdom out there to tap into that maybe we've lost, forgotten, or ignored, I'm not a very religious guy myself, but I sort of look at the origin of organized religions as a way to create a social construct so we can live in peace and find that sort of happiness, very sensible things across almost any sort of organized religion. So if we can wind back and find, well, I'll take another example. I'm almost 50 years old, and I was telling a friend of mine that a lot of this stuff that I'm exploring for myself at midlife, I have the opportunity to teach my 12-year-old son, help him get way ahead of where I am at this point in life. And one of those in particular, I was telling my friend, was breathing, right? So we all think we're breathing, or we are breathing, but are we breathing correctly and optimally? And gosh, all of a sudden I realized that this is something as babies we all do physiologically quite adeptly. And then somehow we get worse at it until we're conscious about it and learn healthy ways to go about breathing. So that tangent aside, I'm, sort of reminded me, well, wow, there's this ancient wisdom maybe we all had at one point or had access to, and now we can tap back into that regardless of maybe our faith system and figure out how it applies to something so important to our meaning, purpose, and happiness like marriage.
100%. And this is Tod. Maybe I'll give you, an example or two of things that we found in kind of our research that people really found extremely, extremely helpful. One example that comes out of Jewish mysticism is an idea that everything in reality is created in two stages. That there's always an initial stage. I'm going to kind of, dumb this down in a way that I can say it and understand it, but I think it makes it applicable, to all of us. And that is that everything that comes into reality first has a stage where there's something which is short-lived, highly inspirational, and gets you involved in it. So, and then that stage, once it gives way to a second stage, the second stage is actually much more difficult, longer. You have to work a lot harder to do it, but you make it real and you make it your own. So let me give you a very quick example. Childhood versus adulthood, right? So childhood is this inspirational, amazing, beautiful thing that we see, and that's why children are so charming and so interesting. A child has this sense that they can be anything. So today she's a ballerina, and tomorrow she's an astronaut, and today he's a policeman, and the next day he's a doctor. And the beauty of childhood is that you have this sense you can be anything. And the tragedy of it, of course, is that you're not really anything at all. You're really nothing. Adulthood is exact opposite. Having had an experience of what I can be, right, with all the possibilities, adulthood is that transitional phase, which is extremely difficult, where a person has to now decide, I'm not going to be A, B, C, and D, but that will obviously and possibly give me the chance to actually be, F or G. And so I cut away all the possibilities it could have been, and that's an extremely painful thing to do, but that enables me to work really hard now for many, many years to actually become something real. And that's what adulthood is all about. And if you do adulthood successfully enough, then you'll regain that sense of inspiration and beauty when you really perfect yourself in that one thing that you can be. And so, okay, so that's something everybody can understand, adulthood and childhood. But now how does that apply to relationships and marriage? So the mystical idea is that we all have this phase one of the relationship that we crave that's so exciting. That's when boy meets girl. They see each other across the dance floor. They see each other across the park. The bells are ringing. The music is playing. We all know that intoxication and that excitement and that unbelievable experience of so-called falling in love. And the problem is that, well, the beauty of it is obviously that it's inspirational, it gets me involved. The problem with it is that it is short-lived. If it doesn't give way to a stage two, scene one, where a person wakes up and says, wait a minute, it's not so exciting anymore. Well, I have two choices. I can say that life has gypped me again and fooled me again, and I better go find another stage one, type relationship. Or I make that big decision to say, wait a minute, that got me interested, that got me involved. Now it's time to actually decide I'm not going to be with all those other people. I am going to commit myself to this person. I'm going to do the work. And that leads to a much longer, much more difficult, but a real and meaningful and purposeful actual creation of love and a relationship and a family and all the other things that a person can build if they put in the work, take responsibility, and really set themselves to doing that. And it's just a literal playing out of the way that, however you want to explain it, nature, the Almighty, the universe has delivered reality to us in that sense. And if a person can really tune themselves into that, then instead of constantly seeking stage one relationships, which always fizzle out after the initial excitement, a person can actually build something real.
Peter, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that, people often ask us, tell us maybe some of the fundamental paradigms that really work for a marriage. And just building off of what Tod said, one of the things that we always tell all of our students and people we're involved with is we always tell them the idea that great marriages are built. And like Tod said, a lot of people, when it comes to relationships or it comes to anything in life, we love that initial stage of inspiration. We love when things are running smooth because there's so much energy. But as soon as we get to that brick wall, our tendency is usually to say, like, maybe this isn't the right thing, or maybe we should move on or get something new. We say that with, our technology, or we say that with our clothing. All the more so we say that in the world of our relationships. And where actually great marriages actually begin to happen is when couples finally get to a point where they say, okay, maybe that initial stage of inspiration is gone. Now let's really work hard to make something amazing. And if couples can really understand that paradigm, they now know when they begin to kind of feel less of that initial emotion, okay, here's where the real work happens that can actually take our marriage to that amazing place.
Yeah, I'm with you. I guess one thing I was wondering about, particularly as you describe the stage one, stage two, and draw the parallel between childhood and adulthood, or maybe evolution, maturation. I guess I was just thinking, I suppose ultimately my question is, are we wired for this, this construct of marriage, of of an enduring relationship, committed relationship? I'm just thinking, when you were describing that surge of energy and excitement and newness you get with the new shirt, the new relationship, not to say they're equal, but it just made me think a little bit of, if I go back to, I'm a caveman, the thrill of the hunt sort of thing. We're so deeply wired for that as a survival thing for so long. And then now with our more modern frontal cortex, these concepts of finding fulfillment and purpose and happiness. And now we're talking about this construct of doing it with another person. Is there evidence that we are wired for this, or, are we somehow inherently fighting somewhat of a deeper nature versus a modern need for this type of fulfillment and happiness?
So it's a beautiful question. I would probably frame the answer in a slightly different way. And I think that a person is constructed of layers, which include at the base layer, let's call it an animal layer, an animal-like layer, which is basically, let's call it preservation, pleasure, maintenance, reproduction. There's a higher level that a human being exhibits, which is also present in the animal world, in the world of mammals, for example, where there's an emotional world, and there is a sense of, of love and hatred, and the way a mother cares for her across the animal kingdom, the way a mother will care for, protect her young, have a connection to them, where certain animal species actually can exhibit, what we would, in our language would call love or affection for each other. And then there's a uniquely human component above and beyond that, which we would call the spiritual, where that is something that you have to exercise and that you have to strive for. The ability to strive for it already creates a different aspect of what a human being is versus the animal world. But not every human being will actually engage themselves in grabbing onto spiritual ideals and then fighting against the resistance and the inertia from the lower parts of the self, which are parts of the self, which are always there and have their own interests. But not every human being will grab onto that fight to say, I will live for something more noble, something more courageous. I will preserve a relationship because of commitment rather than because of pleasure. I will not only protect my young, I will think about ways to enhance their lives and make them, smarter and more creative and give them opportunities that I didn't have, which again, these are uniquely human things. And they are a function of grabbing onto the greatest human capacity, which is the ability to formulate values and then courageously commit yourself to them and try to live by them, even against resistance from outside and from within. And so, it's really a combination of those kind of components that we share with reptiles, the components we share with mammals, and then trying to really pull above that with this human aspect that we call free will, values, spirituality. And that is, by the way, when you can get all three of those working together, that's the trifecta. I mean, that is how you build any relationship which remains reptilian, that's constantly seeking the stage one over and over and over again. A relationship which has an emotional component obviously gets better and raises it up. But when you actually connect in your values and in what you're striving for and what the meaning of your relationship is, and something maybe even bigger than your relationship, that is something that can keep you together through thick and thin. even when my love ebbs and flows, my commitment level, my discipline, my sense of responsibility, and hers to me and mine to her, that's what actually creates a relationship, which is that beautiful, perfect, relationship, which creates my sense of happiness, satisfaction, and all the things that a person craves. So that's the way I would kind of frame the answer to that question, Michael.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that. So in that sense, and the fact that you guys came together, saw this opportunity and the need, why the book, not a partnership? What's different about the way you guys have approached this, different from so many other books about relationships out there?
So I think that this is Peter. I think that what we really saw was something quite fascinating, is that there are a lot of amazing books out there about marriage, and we recommend them, and we've read them, and they're awesome. But what we felt was that these books are awesome about marriage, and they have wonderful tips and strategies. But what a lot of people don't understand is basically two fundamental questions, which is, number one, what is this whole thing called marriage? Meaning, why is it that every person's yearning for this idea called marriage, this state of existence where I live my life with someone else until happily ever after, the idea that we all see in the world that no one feels complete until they found that right person? So number one, what is this whole thing called marriage that we yearn for, that we desire, that we look forward to? And number two, once now I'm actually, going after this thing called marriage, what's the manual of how this is supposed to work? Meaning everything in our life comes with some sort of PDF manual of how to use it properly and how to make it function. And what's fascinating is that here it is, the most important thing in our life, the thing I'm going to work hard for, and I'm going to do everything for it, my marriage and my family, which comes from that. And what we found is that when it comes to the fundamentals of what a marriage is, we found that people don't have that clear. And what we've seen in so many areas of our own life, especially our professional lives or other endeavors, is that when people have the fundamentals clear about what you're doing and what the instruction manual is of how to actually do it, so all of a sudden that leads to a whole world of not just empowerment, but it allows you to stay focused on what you're actually doing because you understand it in a much deeper way. So what we really saw, what we see as our book, is we see our book in some way as, when you're in college, there's all those prerequisite classes you have to take before you can actually get to the class that you want. So while we celebrate all of the marriage books out there, and if you're able to see my bookshelf right now, they're packed with all of those books. What we try to do is make a book which is a step before that, to really frame how all those marriage books kind of fit into this bigger conversation called marriage and building a family.
Yeah, two things, Peter, that I really like about that. Not only does your book define what marriage is, thought about in the right way, but what it isn't, and maybe as Tod said, starting to rule out, what am I not going to be, or what is this not going to look like? That's also helpful. Right. And I also find that really interesting. The second thought I had there was, I had recently, by the time this airs, I had another guest on recently that is an expert in couples therapy. And we talked about the way he approaches that and how relationships can heal. And one of my questions for him was, fantastic, this looks like an incredible service, but how do we avoid getting there in the first place? And what's the proactive approach? How do we take a better approach to this from the beginning? So that's another reason I really like what you guys are tackling here.
So maybe I'll hit a paradigm shift, and then Peter can talk about practical implementation, because I tell you, one of the things we felt we would fail in the book, and therefore we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we did it right, was we wanted on the one hand to give a very deep sense of what the paradigms are of what marriage is, how love works, how love is created, and things like that. But we also felt that without a very, very thought out practical implementation that was usable and user friendly and that couples could work on together and work through together, that it would not be successful, when it hit the real world. So for example, going into marriage, if you ask the average person, like, what makes marriage work and what's going to be the basis of marriage? So a person will say, well, clearly love. The problem is we know, love ebbs and flows in any given moment as we get to know our spouse. And by the way, a person gets married, even if people have lived together, when they get married and they get to know each other better and better, and somehow when that commitment factor is put into the equation, people wind up seeing many aspects of the other, which are baffling, irritating. Sometimes there's ups, sometimes there's downs. I married you and you were healthy, and now you're not healthy. You married me and I was financially well off, and suddenly now I'm not well off. And if it's just a function of the love that I developed, in relation to some of those things, and they ebb and flow, that creates a serious problem. And a lot of people call it quits at those moments, or decide to have open marriage so I can find, the emotional fulfillment with somebody else and the sexual fulfillment with someone else here, and and all sorts of things which begin to, we think, erode the actual beauty of what the relationship can offer. So one of the paradigms, as Peter said, is you got to get a sense that marriages don't just happen, they are built. And I'll tell you, probably that one of the most fundamental paradigms is that what underlies really being a successful spouse is not that I love you and I promise to always love you. It's very hard to take full control over an emotion. But what I can promise is that I will commit myself to making sure that I will act in the capacity as a spouse that you need me to act in to help you have the life that you want and that I'm committing to help you have. When my life becomes, I commit myself through thick and thin to carrying you as much as I can on my shoulders through life, and you're committing yourself in the same way to me, that's an unbelievable strong point to begin life with and to go through life's ups and downs with. And that's a mindset and a paradigm shift that most people do not enter marriage in, and it leads to all kinds of quite amazing things, including longevity and the ability to stick through thick and thin, and all of the benefits that come through, an actual committed relationship. And by the way, this doesn't turn you into a martyr. This winds up creating an incredible virtuous cycle where each side is effectively committing to helping foster the happiness and well-being of the other, there is no virtuous cycle like that we really experience in life, that we can think of. And so it winds up being an extremely powerful paradigm with which to begin marriage. And then Peter, has helped really develop in a very deep way, kind of some of the practical, ways to try to make that happen and keep that alive.
Well, great. Yeah, I love that paradigm. Let's have Peter expound on that and start to talk about some of the practical. And I think I like where this is headed, in the sense of, I remember one of the notes I took, or that was in your book, about character issues that lie at the core of a successful spouse. And when I first read that, I was thinking, what, character traits in my spouse, but in light of what you just said, I think it's more about character traits for myself in being a spouse, which is great, right? We're all here to talk about mindset and self-improvement in this context in marriage. So how do we start to go about being better spouses for our partner?
So what Tod described is basically the structure of what a marriage is and really how it functions. What allows a marriage actually to go from just showing up at the wedding to now actually being something amazing. What we boil it down to is there's basically one ingredient, and that one ingredient is called the world of giving. And what we have seen very clearly, and we can speak about the philosophical side of it, but if we want to just skip over that at the root of what allows a marriage to grow and what allows marriage to develop is where giving is at the fundamental core of that. And therefore, what we do in the book is not only to explain that concept of giving, but that basically is a transition into the world of practicality. Because what we do is we have basically in the book 4 pillars of giving. And these 4 pillars of giving are just different ways of how to take that concept of giving and how to expand it into the world of practicality. And these 4 pillars are extremely practical, and built around different ways of how we can give to our spouse. Now, I'll just tell you the 4 pillars, and then maybe I'll dive into one of them. Number 1 is the world of gratitude. Number 2 is the world of doing everything you can to keep your marriage fresh. Number 3 is the world of doing everything you can as far as respecting your spouse and actually not just feeling that, but actually showing it. And number 4, which is the 4th pillar, which is what you touched upon right now, maybe I'll go into that, is really the world of, it may sound funny, but taking responsibility for what you bring into the marriage. And these are 4 pillars that are all based on giving, and we expound in the book about how you can actually bring these things, practically speaking, into your marriage. Maybe I'll just expound upon the 4th one because you touched upon it. One of the greatest ways of how you can give to your spouse is a bit outside of the box and is an extremely kind of indirect way. I'll set up like this. A person in their life usually has a couple of main core negative traits. We think we're very complicated. We think that we have so many things going on inside of us. If you had to boil a person down and get real kind of X-ray vision as what's going on inside of us, a person usually has a few main core negative traits, and those traits basically touch into every area of our life. Let's say, for example, a person's an anger issue. So all of a sudden, what they're going to find is that anger issue, they're going to get angry at work, they're going to get angry at the neighbor, they're going to get angry at their parents, they're going to get angry at a sports game, they're going to get angry in all areas of life, especially when they're in their own house. And all of a sudden, imagine a scenario like this. A person has an anger issue where obviously they know that anger issue is impacting their marriage. And they say to themselves, forget what my wife does. Forget what's going on in my marriage. What I'm going to do right now is I realize very clearly that I have a main issue that, of course, is impacting my marriage in a tremendous way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to commit myself to take full responsibility for that trait that I have. And now you have, I'm using, a husband, I'll use someone like myself. I say, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do everything I can to attack that anger issue. I'm going to go for therapy. I'm going to read books on anger. I'm going to listen to a podcast on anger. I'm going to practice different meditation techniques to deal with anger. You name it. And the image I always like is you walk into the bedroom, and all of a sudden you see, the husband has on the side of his bed, on his bedside table, he's got a whole pile of books on anger and, a binder from the seminar that he was at speaking about anger. And what you have is basically one person in the marriage taking total responsibility for what they bring into the marriage. And what is so amazing about that is that's actually, although it may seem indirect, why is the husband doing this? Because he wants his marriage to be great, and he realizes that he's a major part of what makes this marriage great. And this issue is probably causing a lot of blockage. And what happens, all of a sudden, you now have this beautiful upward spiral, because chances are, his wife is going to say, whoa, what do I bring into the marriage? What issue do I have in my life that I'm sure it's impacting my friends, my work, my this, but for sure I'm bringing it home as well. And now what you have is after a period of time, her bedside table is packed with all of those books and all of those binders for the issue that she's working on, all with the mindset because she wants her husband to have a beautiful marriage. And that is just more of a description of one of these 4 pillars, which is basically built on giving. And it's really kind of, if we look at all 4 pillars, it's really one of the most effective and powerful pillars that we speak about in the book.
If I'm honest, Peter, so one of the things that caught my eye about your book, about the title, Not a Partnership. So my wife and I just celebrated our 15-year wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I remember she congratulate, what is it? Is it her for putting up with me? However that would work. So I remember at our wedding that So in my wife's Mexican, and their culture, you have like you have godparents for children, you have godparents assigned to couples, and kind of give them some guidance on what marriage is going to look like and the path ahead and all that. And I remember our godparents of our wedding telling me that there is no such thing as a 50-50 partnership in marriage. You always have to be willing to go 100%. You can't make half the bed yourself and call it good. So just thinking about that as you describe this virtuous cycle of being 100% willing, accountable, and willing to be responsible for working on ourselves. And then, as you said, then maybe your spouse shows up with the books on her side of the bed, working on her things, and then how that comes back together. So is that the right way to think about it?
I mean, that's absolutely the right way to think about it, and that is a beautiful piece of wisdom you were given, at the time of your wedding. We call this book Not a Partnership, and the first question we usually get about the book is, "What do you mean marriage not a partnership? I thought marriage is a partnership, and like, what are you talking about?" And the spoiler alert is that properly done, marriage indeed can be the most wonderful, phenomenal, productive, life-enhancing partnership that can possibly exist in this world. But most people approach it as a partnership like partnerships work in the business world. And as you mentioned at the outset, my own background was as a Wall Street analyst, and as a journalist before that. And one of the things I researched a long time ago was, how do partnerships work out there in the world of business? And the funniest thing it's not so funny, but one of the sad things you find about partnerships is that most partnerships fail. Most business partnerships fail. And you might think that that's because, well, there aren't enough good products, they didn't have good financing, their marketing wasn't good. And the answer is no. A lot of the partnerships fail simply because of the mindset of the two people that go into it. What is a normal partnership mindset? As you said, I have my rights and my obligations. You have your rights and obligations. And of course, the way that I think about it when I actually get into the business with you is, I always feel like I'm doing my side. And so what I'm always doing is judging you, resenting you, and feeling that you're not pulling your weight. And so instead of spending my time looking at what can I bring to the table and what can I do for you, instead I'm constantly thinking about, what is it that you're doing for me, and you're never doing enough. And so therefore, the same way that crushes business partnerships, that is unfortunately the way many people who enter, many people go into that wedding day thinking, I just want to make my partner happy. I just want to make, my better half happy and give him or her everything that they want in life. But in a very short period of time, we go from thinking about how can I make you happy to why aren't you doing this for me? Why aren't you doing that for me? You're no longer making me happy. You're no longer doing the things for me you did. I expected so much more. And that is once a person begins, one of the famous rabbis actually once said, the moment you begin making demands of each other, your happiness already left you. It's all that horse already left the barn. All you're seeing is the later manifestation of it at that point when you're now making demands. And to go to a point and to reverse that, we spend a lot of time in the book talking about how can we reverse these trains of thought, getting the paradigm right, and then what practical steps do we take to trying to make that happen. So I think you were very, very fortunate to get such a penetrating and what probably sounded like a very strange, piece of advice at the time, but really very, very penetrating.
Yeah, it might have sounded a bit trite, but now I have years to figure out how to apply that nugget of wisdom. And maybe you guys have stumbled across your next book or your next pursuit. I remember going through an MBA program, and I think it had been relatively recent that the theory evolved to recognizing that going into business with one or two, a small number of partners just has the power of those complementary strengths and weaknesses to increase the success of starting a business or starting a business successfully versus the old, go it alone approach. But nobody's teaching like with you guys with marriage proactively, well, how do I find that right partner and how do I treat that partnership and treat myself in that partnership? So, I mean, maybe if we stick with that fourth pillar of the responsibility on ourselves first, hard enough to get aware of that and those negative traits and the willingness to work on those, but understanding the importance and the benefit of that. How do you start to, or where do things start to come into play, like vulnerability communication hurdles in that endeavor?
I think that in order for a person in their marriage to say, I really have an issue in my personal life that's not only impacting all areas outside of my marriage, but especially my marriage, I think you have to be pretty vulnerable, and you have to feel that putting yourself out there and making yourself kind of, I guess, open to your issue. Meaning, if I don't feel I'm in a safe environment, and I tell someone I have a real anger issue that I think is impacting this relationship a lot, if I'm in an unhealthy relationship, that person's going to jump on me and say, you're right, your anger issue is destroying everything, and I always knew it was your problem. So obviously there has to be a certain safety in your marriage for you to step up and you to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to start working on this, and I really think I have a problem, I'm going to own it. But what I'm hoping happens, and what we have seen happen, is I don't think that a lot of talk actually has to happen around this pillar per se. And I think that a lot of times what can happen in marriages and in relationships that we're in is that we can talk a lot, and we can speak about being vulnerable, and we can speak about the world of change. But the question always becomes, okay, what are you practically doing about it? And what I find actually happens, and what I encourage couples I deal with to do, is not so much for this couple to say, okay, this is my issue, I'm going to do, and this spouse to say this is my issue, and the other spouse to say this is my issue, just to start doing it and start making it happen. And then what I find from there is that all of a sudden the closeness develops in the couple once they're already in the process in a very special way. So I get worried sometimes about talking about it too much or whatever it may be. Sometimes it's much better to let's start the process along. And now once we're in the process, then when change can be seen and when the efforts can be seen, then the conversations and closeness, it becomes much easier.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I'm all about action and adjusting course as we go. So if we, I guess, just honing in on this one, and fantastic book. And, before we run out of time, we definitely have to let people know where to find you guys and follow along and get it. But on this pillar that we focused on, and to that point you just made, what are one or two things people can do to start? How do we take action?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we found, and we've probably worked over the last 15 years, I don't know, Peter, maybe you'll correct me, but probably something like 150 couples, something like that. And by the way, we're not marriage therapists. We're basically educators who have wound up spending an inordinate amount of time dealing with marriage, and it got to a point where we actually looked at the results over 15 years, and we realized that with the principles we were teaching, and with kind of the coaching we were, and hand-holding that we were giving people along these lines, we found that the couples that we had been working with had about a 5% divorce rate, which is about a tenth of the divorce rate in the United States. And so we just had a sense of, wow, this really can work. And one of the most powerful things that we saw was when a person would be, and I think this will be the answer, the direct answer to your question. We saw very frequently a person would begin complaining about things going on with their spouse. Now, without having to go all the way to the end where Peter was saying, where I make myself fully vulnerable and I say, I'm the one with the anger problem and I'm going to go fix my character issue. We would simply talk to each spouse about the idea that, first of all, recognize that the two of you are on a team that nobody else is on. It's the two of you against the world. If you both act like you're members of that team and work together, you can create something very special. Without it, you're just going to fall apart like most other couples you've seen. Just say to yourself, I am willing to basically say this relationship relies upon me alone. If a person can actually say that to themselves, I'm going to behave for the time being as no matter what my spouse may or may not be doing, I'm going to get a mindset and I'm going to make a commitment. I am going to do something to fix this relationship by myself. Maybe it's going to be appreciated properly. Maybe it's going to be recognized the way I want it to be recognized. Maybe it won't, but I'm going to start that process. And we found, probably more than anything else with the couples that were facing problems, whether it was early years, mid years, as they were going through the process of building the relationship, that mindset of, I will take responsibility. We actually called the chapter about this, we called it, "It All Depends on Me." And with that mindset, a person can jumpstart the process. And I'm sure Peter will want to jump in and talk about how, some practical ways of making that happen. But if a person sits down with his wife and says, "I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to start making things better," it will start getting better and it will get noticed. And then that sparks that virtuous circle that we began talking about before. So it really begins with a mindset and just starting to do some things. Give to her, buy her presents, call her and tell her you appreciate her. There's many, many ways of approaching it, but it starts with that mindset, that commitment, and saying, starting on Tuesday, I am making this marriage my business to fix.
So thank you, Tod. Peter, as you jump in there and with that segue on mindset and communications, and I know you're the mindset and demonstrating that, going out and saying and doing nice things. You're the guy that studied applied positive psychology. So could you also talk about, I think in the way Tod said that, I'm willing to say that this relies on me alone. Could you also talk about maybe the inner dialogue and the maybe consciousness on the way we phrase things to ourselves and even to our partner, in a positive way that moves us in that mindset and moves us in that action?
So I think that the most important thing in anything in life has to be that you see a reason of why you're doing it. And I think all of us, when we get married, we all have a hope and we all have a desire that this is going to be the most amazing part of my life. And I think that if people don't have that, then I don't really see a way of how you can build an amazing marriage or how you can work through difficulties. If people do have that, and you really know this is the most amazing person, this can be great, we can build something amazing together. And even more so, I tasted that when we first got married, because I did have this amazing sense of connection and closeness and chemistry. So I think that when people have this vision about what they can get to or what they can get back to, that allows them to stay positive and keep working. If people don't have that, if someone says to me, well, I'm not really sure this is the one, or I'm not really sure that I want to, make my marriage, I want to give my marriage everything that it deserves in order to make it great. If people don't have their head screwed on to get to that end goal, if they don't have a sense of hope that things can be different, so I think it's very difficult. And when people do have that, I find you're able to talk yourself through even the difficult times, because there's an amazing light at the end of the tunnel. So, there's a famous theory in the world of psychology, which is a theory called hope theory, which people speak about, especially in the world of positive psychology, which is that if a person doesn't have a sense of hope, then they can't really grow. And therefore, the most important thing when a person is working on themselves is that the most important thing a therapist has to do is give that client a sense that things can be different in the future. Because if you see there's a light in the tunnel, that will encourage you to work through the difficult stage. So I think that if people can tap into that inner desire that I want to have a great marriage, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person, I want to get back to that magic that I originally tasted and beyond, that allows them to push forward and keep trying. If people don't have that, I find things fall apart quite fast.
Beautiful. Thank you for the reminder on that. You mentioned your bookshelf earlier. If I could point to mine behind me right now, the book Start With Why is always up there. So I love that reference back to, why we're here in the first place in this
Right.
relationship, for example, in this case. So maybe before we wrap, I know it's getting late in the night for you guys over there. So, we're talking a little bit here about where to start and what to start on doing. So I just have a question on not doing as well, in the sense of one of you, I think Tod might have mentioned discipline in the way that we conduct these things for ourselves and working on a marriage relationship. I mean, at least over here in the U.S. culture, the consumerism culture is just all built around the psychology and marketing and advertising of the the shiny new object, and certainly there are people that get trapped in that and looking for that. We're talking about the stage one thing again, the shiny new relationship and those feelings that go along with it. So social media, where does that play into our discipline as a married spouse?
That is a $1 billion question, Michael, and that's something we actually spent quite a bit of time on. I'd like to say maybe one thing about it, and I'm sure Peter would also like to add, but there's something that is called social comparison theory. Social comparison theory is effectively that rather than being the arbiter of my own emotional state, meaning if life is going well and I'm doing meaningful things, I'm happy. If I have good relationships, I'm happy. I have a job I can fulfill, but a person can be happy if they can be the arbiter of their own judgment of what their life looks like. Social comparison theory says that there's an encroachment that takes place, and I begin to judge my own well-being and happiness by comparing myself with others. Now, obviously, for eons, this has been the basis of all advertising, right? What is advertising other than the creation of a need which didn't exist? That suit that you actually thought was an awesome suit, wait a minute, advertising is telling me it really doesn't look good anymore. It's out of date. It's out of style. You don't look cool anymore. So therefore, I'm constantly, starting with the world of advertising, I begin to get outside pictures that my life just isn't so good as I thought it was. If I see people whose lives appear to be happier than mine, then I will begin to question my own happiness as well. Now, this has always been present in our society one way or another. This is just part of the human condition. But what's happened is that social media has put that on steroids, because now, rather than just, when I pick up a magazine and I see that guy has that girl and that car and those clothes and, that lifestyle, now I am bombarded with it, 100, 200 times a day. Every time I check in with my social media account, I am seeing people who are showing me what are very frequently very false moments in their lives, but it's always when they look good, when they are with somebody exciting, when they are someplace beautiful, when they're doing something amazing. Very few people feature on their Facebook page pictures of them doing housework, not feeling well, taking the garbage out, cooking dinner. Instead, it's, this exciting place, this exciting thing. And the more images that I see like that, especially if I don't have awesome self-esteem, the research shows that a person can become quite depressed with their own life. And to feel that, wow, I thought I had a good marriage. I thought I had a nice wife. I thought she was attractive. And I thought, she was a good cook. And I thought, all these kind of like things I always thought were okay in my life. Suddenly I look at it and I say, wow, they're really not good at all. I wish I had that person's life. So in a sense, the more we sort of allow ourselves unfettered access to social media, again, if we need it for work, we need it for work. And if we needed to communicate with the people we needed to communicate, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not going against the things that we need it for. But when it becomes our primary way of negotiating society, and what it has and how it lives, that can be absolutely devastating and make it very, very, very hard for me to be satisfied with what I have. And that just feeds back into I need another stage one part of the relationship, as opposed to making stage two, real and functional and finding my happiness there.
Right. Okay. I wasn't sure if Peter was going to piggyback on that, but it is so bizarre to me that we can swipe that screen and get those little endorphin hits, but at the same time end up sort of depressing ourselves because, I'm not looking at the Instagram page of somebody showing off that they're dirt poor, right? I've got to look at the billionaires webpage.
That's right.
Well, again, I know we're up on time here, guys. So I really appreciate this. Maybe I'll just use that as a segue to say that, hey, there are beneficial uses to this tool, social media included, and that's one place we can find you guys. So since we are running out of time, maybe let's just wrap up with website, social media, where people can find you guys, tune into more of what you're doing, and then of course where to get the book, Not a Partnership.
Sure, great. Thank you. This is the easiest place to find us. The center point for getting access to all the things that we're doing is our website, and it is www.notapartnership.com. And in fact, for anybody who's been listening to this podcast, we actually have some special stuff that we put in there for your listeners. And so if you go to notapartnership.com/mastery, you will be able to access some of those things there. The book is available on Amazon, and via the website, you get really access to our social media, our videos, podcasts, etc., all the things that we've been doing.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely appreciate that. I will certainly put in the show notes for this one links to your book on Amazon, to your website, to your social media, and really appreciate the extra in there for the Mastery listeners. Just in terms of you guys, and I know you're plugged into the U.S. here and the academic community, as well as what you're doing over there. You did mention that you work with some couples directly. Is that locally there, or is that an international endeavor as well? Do you work with people remotely?
We basically do that with the students that we've been working with. We are so fully engaged with the students that we felt that the one way that we can broaden the wisdom that we felt we discovered and just could not hold to ourselves and felt that everybody should have access to, the one way we really felt we could bring that out there was through the process of writing the book and making that book available to a general audience. We're not trying to support kind of a coaching business or a marital therapist business. We just felt that we're fully engaged in what we're doing. We're fully busy in what we're doing, over busy in what we're doing. But we also felt that we could share it by putting it into, language that was totally accessible and into both a philosophical framework, which we talked about, and then a practical implementation. And that is, the way we sort of hit the masses, so to speak. Everything else we're doing is really, for people outside of the institute that we're running, is really being done via the social media through, we have a Facebook group and things like that, where we interact much, much more with individuals and with couples, kind of outside of our framework. And that's the one place where we kind of go global with a personal touch. And, again, that's accessible via the website.
Perfect. Okay. Got it. Well, thank you guys both so much for taking the time and for sharing a bit of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. There's so much more in there. And I just really want to thank you guys, not in addition to spending a little bit of time to spin the audience up on what they can find in your book and the depth there and in your website and your social media, but just thank you guys for going through this and packaging your wisdom and your experience and what you've researched and bringing it to us in this book. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you
very
so much.
much.
Okay.